This is what they don't want you to know: the real law of attraction and how to apply it in your life. Many people will be familiar with the New Age variants of the so-called law or laws of attraction, and this is going to differ quite widely from what people have heard in the New Age community and the New Age movement regarding what the law or laws of attraction are. These are eternal truths that are really deep, that have been hidden from humanity for millennia. This is what they don't want you to know. People all over the world will tell you that they want certain things in their life and that they want certain things to be present for all of humanity. We will tell you that we want certain conditions to be present for ourselves and for our species as a whole, and we will say that we want things like happiness, health, peace, prosperity, and freedom. These are all wonderful things to strive for, and we will tell you that we want them. The majority of people will say and tell you that they want these things. There are prerequisites that must be met before we can achieve the conditions that we assert that we desire. Demand occurs in nature. It does exist. You just have to accept the default conditions the way they are right now and carry on with your existence. If you're okay with things being the way they are right now, there are no requirements to creating change. If you want something to be different than the way that it already is, then the default conditions, then requirement exists. If you want something to be different than the way that it already is, then the default conditions, then requirement does not exist. If you are okay with things being the way that they are right now, then requirement does. If the requirements for obtaining those conditions are not met, then those conditions will not magically appear by magical means automatically. This is not how the process works. There are specific requirements that need to be met in order for human beings to obtain the conditions that they say they want. This is a fundamental idea that needs to be grasped. We are required to have particular types of knowledge, specifically the kind that will motivate us to take action. This information is occulted, which means it is hidden from view. However, the first thing you need to realize is that the word occult is merely taken from the Latin word occultus, and occultus means hidden in Latin. The word occult means hidden from sight in English. The information concerning natural law is occulted knowledge. It is knowledge that has been hidden from humanity. It is held by the few, which is represented here at the top of this pyramid. You can look at this as a pyramid representing knowledge or ignorance. At the top of the pyramid, you have knowledge. The higher you go in the pyramid, the more knowledge there is. However, the pyramid tapers because at the top very few people understand that information. Down here, you have no knowledge. What is this so-called occulted knowledge? Esoteric knowledge can be broken down into two distinct categories. There are two main categories of occult knowledge contained within the genuine mystery traditions. They are referred to as arcana in occult schools. Arcana. The word arcana originates from Latin and means knowledge. This refers to the fact that the subject matter is concerned with the different components that make up the human psyche. The first significant body of esoteric knowledge is comprised of information regarding the human consciousness, including how it functions, how it operates, and what our motives are. The second body of occult knowledge is known as the Greater Arcana or the Major Arcana. These natural laws are invisible and universal spiritual rules that control the repercussions of actions for intelligent species and for beings who are capable of coming to their comprehension. It's been called karma and karmic law in many Middle Eastern and Eastern traditions. It's been called moral law in some Western traditions and Christian traditions. Religionists have called it God's law. Why is this knowledge hidden away from people? There's a reason for that. In order to create and maintain a power differential. They know how something works, such as how human consciousness works, how human motivations work, how human perceptions work. How the garbage that you hear on the news, the nonsense that you play in video games, and the crap that you see on television are all there for one purpose, to prevent people from realizing the difference between reality and human perception. Please take note of these lines in white. Suppose that there are these unchanging white lines that represent the truth, and now imagine that there are three different people whose perceptions will be judged against the truth. If your consciousness is high, which means it is operating at a high frequency, then you are going to have a greater capacity to comprehend and identify the patterns. This is individual A, this is individual B, and this is individual C. Their capacity to perceive what has occurred and what is occurring is what I would refer to as consciousness. This is individual A. This is individual B. This is individual C. Their ability to perceive what has occurred and what is operating is what I would refer to as consciousness. If your level of consciousness is low, then you are operating at a low frequency, and as a result, you will see the pattern less frequently. The longer the wavelength, the lower the frequency. What this indicates is the frequency with which it will be crossing the line that stands for the truth. The higher the frequency, the more in tune we are with the truth. What would happen if this frequency reached an infinitely high level? It would become indistinguishable from a line, and as a result, someone's experience of reality would become accurate. If this frequency reached an infinitely high level, it would become indistinguishable from a line. Consider this in terms of sound. When you hear a low bass tone, it's like, and then it goes up, music. And it would go eventually outside the range of human hearing because the frequency went so high. Same concept here. The higher the frequency, the higher the perception of reality. The quality of the perception is going to be the concept to keep in mind here, as perception is not reality, it's the filter we see reality through. Down here is the reptilian brain. It's comprised of the reptilian brain is comprised. The R complex is the part of the brain with the lowest level of consciousness. We don't do any thinking with this part of the brain. The R complex is the reactive part of the brain. It reacts to stimulus. It's the stimulus response mechanism in this middle part of the brain. These are all the different glands, such as the hypothalamus, the thalamus, the pituitary and pineal glands, and so on, that comprise the midbrain or the limbic system. This area of the brain is responsible for all of a person's feelings and makes them conceivable. The neocortex is essentially the covering of the higher brain, telencephalon, which is where emotions are processed. What you need to realize about the telecephalon or the hemispheres of the brain is that they are first and foremost bilaterally symmetrical, and they normally handle various functions of cognition. However, in general, the left hemisphere of the brain is what governs reasoning. Logical thinking, scientific thinking, mathematical thinking, and linear cognitive processes all fall under this category. The right side of the brain, also known as the right hemisphere, is in charge of or generally facilitates and makes it possible for human creativity as well as all of the emotional dynamics of the human being. Holistic thought, being able to see the big picture thinking, pattern recognition, and then things like compassion, nurturing, care. Now if this left part of the brain becomes chronically dominant, the masculine part of the brain, and I'm putting these symbols here. This is an ancient archetypal symbol called the blade. It's a simple upward pointing triangle, and this downward pointing triangle is another ancient archetypal symbol that was referred to in the ancient world as the chalice, the cup, etc. Okay, and you know that this was a rudimentary phallic symbol, and this was the nurturing, compassionate, creative, and intuitive sides of consciousness coexist with the intellectual aspect of consciousness, and you can see this reflected in the word intelligence, which derives from the Latin word for right, intel, which means intellect. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, true intelligence is a holistic understanding that incorporates the right brain into the process. The term GENCE originates from the Latin verb generare, which means to generate or to create. Therefore, it refers to the creative side of a person's personality or the right hemisphere of the brain. Real intelligence is comprised of intellect in addition to creativity, logical thinking, nurturing, and compassion. Holistic intelligence, and the majority of people in our society do not have holistic intelligence. Instead, they have some form of brain imbalance. If a human being's left brain hemisphere becomes chronically dominant, the R complex will take over executive function of the brain, and the person will become ruled by selfishness and base desires. They will develop a personality that is based in dominance and control. On the other hand, if a human being's right brain hemisphere becomes chronically dominant, the limbic system will take over the executive function of the entire brain, and the person will develop a personality that is based on submissiveness and naivete, which are the general principles of natural law. This will happen because the limbic system will take control of the executive function of the whole brain. Natural law is expressed through 7 fundamental underlying principles in addition to what I have referred to as an 8th or hidden principle, which very few other researchers, even people who are studying this from an occult perspective, who are studying this from a consequentialism perspective, you very hear them incorporate the 8th and all-encompassing principle. This 8th principle, which I refer to as the lost principle, ties all of the other 7 principles together. These principles, taken as a whole, constitute a master key through which universal wisdom, including the knowledge of the requirements to obtaining what we desire, is then revealed or occultated. These are the 7 general principles of natural law. Mentalism, correspondence, vibration, the dynamics of polarity, rhythm, and cause and effect, as well as gender. According to the mentalism premise, everything in creation is actually a manifestation of thought. This is the fundamental tenet of the philosophical movement. According to the concept of correspondence, something that is above is analogous to or comparable to something that is below. What this implies is that there is a direct relationship between the two, with the above being analogous to the below and the below being analogous to the above. According to the principle of vibration, there is no such thing as stillness, everything vibrates, and at the most fundamental level, the universe and everything that constitutes it is ultimately pure vibratory energy that is manifesting itself in different ways, different frequencies, and different vibratory forms. There are polarities in everything that exists. According to the principle of polarity, everything has poles, everything has its pair of opposites. However, opposites are identical in nature but they differ in degree. According to the principle of rhythm, the principle of polarity states that everything possesses a dual nature to it. There are polarities in everything that exists. Everything has its own outgoing and incoming currents, and every body of water has tides. Everything has a rhythm or a swing to it. There are tendencies that exist in energy. There are cycles that occur in everything. The pendulum swing manifests in all that we go through and everything that we perceive. The measure of the swing to the right is the measure of the swing to the left. It's just an opposing, it's regarded as an opposite rhythm will compensate. This is the natural law principle that corresponds most closely with how I'm going to use the term natural law today, and it is the principle of cause and effect. The principle of cause and effect simply states that every cause has its effect and that every effect has its cause. Every single thing that happens according to law, and chance is just a name for a law that isn't recognized. There are many planes of causation, but nothing escapes the law. Although you can't change, the concept of gender appears one more time as the 7th and final fundamental of natural law. I'm going to talk about an 8th lost one. Gender is present in everything. Everything has its masculine and its feminine components or principles. We've already seen that gender manifests on all planes of existence, including the human brain, consciousness, worldview, and so on. I'm going to talk about an 8th lost one. Gender exists in everything. Everything has its masculine and its feminine components or principles. I'm going to talk about an 8th lost one. Gender exists in everything. Everything has its. This following paragraph is what I refer to as the lost principle. This is the 8th principle of natural law, and it is the principle that holds all of the other principles together. It is the container in which all of the other principles fit very nicely and neatly, but we aren't using it, so it's gone to waste. We have already examined the 1st through 7th principles of natural law, and they are depicted by these circles that overlap one another. However, we aren't using the 8th principle because we don't exercise it. Here is the 8th circle, which represents the seed of life. If you think about what develops from a seed, you can say that it grows, generates something, and creates something new. This principle, also known as the 8th or the lost principle, is the thing that needs to be present in order for any change to become apparent. The 8th principle is known as the generative principle or the principle that governs creation. This principle actually is the causal factor that goes into effect and generates the result that we say that we want, but what's the real term for it now? Most people will say it's love. The generative principle is care. Here is what the 8th principle is. Here's 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 what the 8th principle is. People sometimes ask why I don't use the word compassion, but that's not what I'm talking about. This is a different notion than compassion or even what I would define as love. People often ask why I don't use the word compassion because that's not what I'm talking about. What are you giving attention to and helping to grow? What are you focusing upon? Because what you're focusing upon is ultimately what's getting generated, created, and growing. This does not mean that you should be ignorant of what is going on in the world and that you shouldn't look at anything that is negative because you will feed it and give it power. This is not what it means. Instead, What it means is that you should pay attention to what you're giving attention to and what you're focusing upon. That means you know what you're feeding in that instance. If you want to do that, you're feeding ignorance, and that's what's going to grow. It's the exact opposite of what the New Agers want you to believe that it is. By ignoring the negative, you're ensuring that more of it occurs. You are fueling it by ignorance. This is what you're giving your energy to. This is what you're focused upon. This is what you actually care enough about to do, to spend your time on, to put effort into this, because most people don't care about what's really happening. This is what creates our experience as a whole. As a result, it is impossible for us as a whole to change the direction of energy, change the direction of consciousness, and ultimately get what we say we want. This is how the true law of attraction works, and this is how it actually operates. The care-oriented dynamic is the fundamental idea that has been forgotten. The things that are important to us on a day-to-day basis serve as the impetus for both our thoughts and our deeds. What did I just say? That we need to develop our heart, mind, and guts in that order. Care comes first. You have to care enough to know in order to develop the knowledge. Okay. Then you have to act on it and put it into practice and apply it. So that's the order: heart, mind, guts, care, knowledge, action. These are the steps, and in order for any of them to be considered complete, all three of them are required. That is what unity consciousness is. It is the unification of our flaws, emotions, and behaviors. The three facets of awareness in such a way that there is no internal conflict between them, because our thoughts, what we say, what we think, how we feel, and how we act are all one and the same. There is no conflict between them. This is what we mean when we talk about unity consciousness. As a result, concern is what drives both our thoughts and our actions. In the end, it can be seen as the generator of the quality of our shared experience here on Earth. Care is what generates the whole thing, hence it has been called the generative principle. Compare the heart to a pump in the body. Well, what does a pump in the body do? It's a generator. It provides energy. It moves the life force through the blood in the body. In every ancient tradition they talk about the life force being in the blood. The heart is what pumps that through the womb and out into the world. Care is what generates. Thank you for listening in Audiobook Academy. Wish you all the best in life. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell. See you in next audiobook.